Imagine a spacecraft large enough to carry 1,000 people toward another star. It has light and air and water, food and medicine and power. It is everything a small civilization needs to survive for centuries. And it will never stop. The engines work. The systems hold. The destination draws closer with every passing year. But somewhere between Earth and the next star, something changes. The ship stops feeling like a vessel and starts feeling like a cage, not because anything broke, not because anyone failed, but because the distance behind you is too far to go back. The distance ahead is too far to see the end. Tonight, we are going to explore why the first interstellar ship would become a prison long before it ever reached another star. Before we get started, if you love exploring the depths of space as much as we do, take a second to like the video or subscribe. It's a simple action, but it helps this channel reach more curious minds like yours. Also, before we begin, we're now live on Spotify. The link's in the description if you'd like to listen to us wherever you are. Now, let's begin. There is a moment that every civilization probably reaches if it survives long enough. A moment when the last frontiers on the home world have been crossed, when every ocean has been charted and every continent mapped, and the only unexplored territory left is above. The sky, the stars, the enormous dark between them. For us, that moment is arriving now. We have walked on the moon, we have landed robots on Mars, we have sent probes past the outer planets and into the space beyond our sun. And somewhere in the back of every space agency's long-term plan, somewhere in the mathematics of every serious propulsion study, there is a question that nobody can quite put down. Could we actually send people to another star? Not signals, not data encoded in radio waves, not a robotic probe the size of a postage stamp. People, living, breathing, aging human beings, sealed inside a spacecraft, pointed away from the only world our species has ever known, and launched on a journey that would define or end their lives. The idea is beautiful. It may be the most beautiful idea our species has ever had. Is the logical conclusion of a story that started when the first human being looked up at the night sky and wondered what the lights actually were. For thousands of years, the stars were mysteries. Then they were physics. Then they became objects we could study with telescopes and spectrometers and space-based observatories. And somewhere in the last few decades, a small number of those stars became something else entirely. They became destinations, at least in theory. And the nearest one, the closest star to our own solar system, became the first name on the list: Proxima Centauri. Proxima Centauri is a small red dwarf star, part of the Alpha Centauri triple star system, which includes the Sun-like pair Alpha Centauri A and Alpha Centauri B orbiting each other at relatively close range, and Proxima Centauri orbiting both of them at a much greater distance. Proxima sits approximately 4.24 light-years from Earth. It is the nearest star to us. In 2016, astronomers confirmed the existence of a roughly Earth-sized planet orbiting within its habitable zone, the region where temperatures might allow liquid water to exist on a planetary surface. They named it Proxima Centauri b. That discovery electrified the scientific community. The nearest star to us did not just burn in the dark. It had a world. A world with a reason to go and look. 4.24 light-years. It sounds almost modest when you say it quickly. 4.25 light-years. Practically next door, in cosmic terms. A light-year is the distance that light travels in 1 year, moving at roughly 186,000 miles per second. Light is the fastest thing in the universe. Nothing with mass can reach that speed, and nothing we know of can exceed it. At that velocity, a beam of light leaving Earth right now would arrive at Proxima Centauri in about 4 years and 3 months. But we are not light. We are heavy, fragile biological mass that needs air and water and warmth and food and protection from radiation. We ride inside machines made of metal and composites and fuel, and those machines are extraordinarily slow compared to light. The distance that a photon crosses in 4 years is not a distance that any human-built vehicle has ever come close to covering in a human lifetime. And that fact, more than any other, is the foundation of everything that follows tonight. Let me make the distance concrete. Proxima Centauri is approximately 25 trillion miles from Earth. 25, followed by 12 zeros. Voyager 1, launched in 1977, is the most distant human-made object in existence. It has been flying away from Earth for nearly 50 years. It is currently more than 15 billion miles from where it started, moving at approximately 38,000 miles per hour. That is fast enough to cross the United States in about 4 minutes. Voyager 1 covers roughly 1 million miles a day. It has been doing that every single day for almost half a century, and it has crossed less than 0.1% of the distance to Proxima Centauri. At its current velocity, Voyager 1 would need approximately 76,000 years to reach the nearest star. 76,000 years. That is longer than any chapter of human history. Longer than every civilization, every empire, every language, every written word in human history combined. The Parker Solar Probe, launched in 2018, is the fastest spacecraft humanity has ever built. At its closest approach to the Sun, it reaches speeds of roughly 430,000 miles per hour. That is fast enough to fly from New York to Tokyo in under a minute. If you could point the Parker Solar Probe at Proxima Centauri and somehow maintain that speed in open interstellar space, which you cannot, because it achieves that velocity by falling toward the Sun and would bleed speed rapidly without a gravitational source to pull it, the journey would still take approximately 6,700 years. That is longer than all of recorded human history. Longer than the span between the first known writing and the phone in your pocket. So here is the first wall. The distance to even the nearest star is so vast that our fastest existing machines would take thousands to tens of thousands of years to cross it. And Proxima Centauri is the closest option we have. If you want a star with better odds of hosting a habitable world, something orbiting a calmer, more sun-like star that does not blast its planets with radiation flares every few days, you are looking at systems 8, 10, 12, or 20 light years away. The travel times scale accordingly. The distances grow fast, and the physics does not care how much we want to close them. Now there are propulsion concepts that could dramatically reduce those numbers. Nuclear pulse propulsion, fusion drives, laser sails, antimatter engines, each has been studied seriously. Each has profound unsolved problems ranging from the political impossibility of sequential nuclear detonations to the fact that the total antimatter ever produced on Earth would not power a light bulb for more than a few seconds. But tonight we are not here to talk about engines. We are here to talk about what happens to the people inside the ship, regardless of how the ship moves. So let us be generous. Let us assume that within the next century or two, humanity develops a propulsion system capable of accelerating a crewed spacecraft to somewhere between 5 and 10% of the speed of light. That is an enormous assumption. It requires breakthroughs in physics and engineering that do not currently exist. But it is the kind of assumption that serious interstellar mission studies make when they want to explore what happens once the engine problem is solved. At 5% of light speed, the journey to Proxima Centauri takes roughly 85 years. At 10%, approximately 42 years. These are the time frames that most credible interstellar mission proposals work with. Decades to a century, possibly longer for destinations beyond the nearest star. And here is where the dream begins to change shape. Because a journey of 42 years is not a trip. It is not an expedition you return from with photographs and stories. It is a significant fraction of a human lifetime. A person who boards the ship at age 30 arrives at age 72, assuming everything goes perfectly. At 5% of light speed, that same person would be 115 when the ship reaches Proxima Centauri. They will not live to see the destination. Their children might. Their grandchildren almost certainly will. This means the ship is not a vehicle in any ordinary sense of the word. A vehicle takes you somewhere and then you get off. You drive to work and park the car. You fly across the ocean and walk off the plane. The vehicle is a temporary container. The journey has a beginning and an end. And the end involves stepping out into a world that is not the vehicle. An interstellar ship does not work that way. The ship is not carrying the crew to a destination and dropping them off. The ship is the place where they live. It is the place where they work, where they eat, where they sleep, where they age. For most of the people who will ever exist aboard it, the ship is not a conveyance. It is the only world they have ever known or will ever know. And the moment you understand that, the entire emotional landscape of the mission shifts beneath your feet. Because a ship you cannot leave is not a vehicle. It is a container. And a container you cannot leave, no matter how well designed, no matter how comfortable, no matter how nobly intended, shares a deep structural similarity with something else entirely. A prison. Not a prison built by cruelty or by punishment. Not a prison designed to hold criminals or enforce sentences. A prison built by distance. A prison whose walls are made of vacuum and physics and the absolute impossibility of stepping outside. Let me show you how the distance constructs those walls, step by step, because it is important that you understand this is not metaphor. It is not dramatic exaggeration. It is physics, and it is irreversible. When the ship launches, it is close to Earth. In the first hours and days, communication with the mission control is nearly instantaneous. The crew can talk to their families in real time. Earth is right there, close, present, a safety net stretched beneath them. But the ship is accelerating. It is moving away from Earth, and it is moving faster every hour. Within weeks, the communication delay grows from seconds to minutes. Within months, from minutes to hours. The conversations that once felt like phone calls begin to feel like exchanges of letters. You say something, you wait. Eventually a response comes back, but the moment has passed. The emotional rhythm of real conversation is gone. By the time the ship passes the orbit of Mars, the delay is measured in minutes to tens of minutes. Mars at its closest to Earth is about 3 light minutes away. At its farthest, roughly 22 light minutes. NASA is studying what this kind of delay does to human psychology right now. Their CHAPIA program at Johnson Space Center is running its second year-long simulated Mars mission, with 4 crew members sealed inside a 1,700 square foot habitat, experiencing communication delays of up to 22 minutes each way. Even in that simulation, even knowing it is a simulation, even with Earth literally right outside the building walls, the crew reports measurable effects on stress, decision-making, and their relationship with mission control. And that is just Mars, a 22-minute delay. An interstellar ship does not stop at Mars. As the ship pushes beyond the outer solar system, the delay grows from minutes to hours. When Voyager 1 crossed into interstellar space, its radio signals took about 17 hours to reach Earth. At that distance, a round-trip conversation takes more than a day. You send a question in the morning. You receive the answer the next evening. The exchange no longer resembles human communication in any meaningful way. It is correspondence, slow, patient, and completely disconnected from the real-time flow of events aboard the ship. And then the ship crosses into true interstellar space. The sun shrinks to a bright star behind them. The distance to Earth climbs from light hours to light weeks to light months. At 1 light year from Earth, a message takes an entire year to arrive. A reply takes another year to return. A single round-trip exchange spans 2 full years. If a crisis erupts aboard the ship and the crew sends an urgent message to Earth, the earliest they could possibly receive a response is 2 years later. By then, the crisis is either resolved or everyone involved is dead. At 2 light years from Earth, the round-trip delay is 4 years. At the halfway point to Proxima Centauri, it is more than 4 years. By the time an answer arrives from Earth, the question belongs to a different era of the ship's life. The people who asked it may have changed roles, changed their minds, or passed away entirely. The context is gone. The advice is obsolete. This is not a technical inconvenience that better radios could fix. This is an absolute physical limit imposed by the speed of light. No signal of any kind, radio, laser, anything, can travel faster than light. And no engineering breakthrough can change that because it is not an engineering problem. It is a law of physics. What this means in human terms is the severing of a lifeline. On the International Space Station, astronauts orbit approximately 250 miles above the surface. The communication delay is a fraction of a second. If something goes wrong, if a system fails or a medical emergency occurs, Mission Control in Houston can see the telemetry in real time. Hundreds of engineers and specialists are available immediately. Replacement parts can be launched on resupply missions within weeks. The ISS is never truly alone. Earth is always there, watching, listening, ready to intervene. An interstellar ship loses all of that. Not suddenly, not in a single dramatic moment, but gradually, continuously, and permanently. The farther it flies, the thinner the tether to Earth becomes. At some point, and this point arrives far sooner than most people would guess, the connection to Earth ceases to be operationally meaningful. You cannot call for help when help takes years to arrive. You cannot ask for engineering advice when the situation will be resolved or fatal long before the advice reaches you. You cannot request a rescue when no vehicle exists that could reach you in any relevant time frame. I think of this as the no rescue threshold. It is not a single fixed distance. It depends on the nature of the emergency, the response time required, and the capabilities of anything Earth could theoretically send. But in practical terms, once the ship is more than a few light weeks from Earth, No meaningful external intervention is possible for any time-sensitive crisis. And once the ship is a light year out, the isolation is absolute, total, permanent. There is no one coming. There is no backup. There is no plan B that involves anyone outside the hull. From that point forward, the crew is alone in a way that has no precedent in all of human experience. Not temporarily alone, like a submarine crew during a deployment who knows they will surface and return to port. Not seasonally alone, like an Antarctic winter over team counting the weeks until the supply plane lands in spring. Alone without an end date. Alone without a rescue protocol. Alone with the complete and permanent certainty that no one outside the ship can do anything at all if something goes wrong. And inside the ship, everything depends on the ship. The air comes from the ship's recycling systems. The water is recovered and purified by the ship's reclamation hardware. The food is grown in the ship's agricultural modules. The light, the warmth, the gravity, all generated by the ship's own systems. Remove any one of these systems, and people start dying. Not in months, not in weeks, in hours or days. If the air recycling system fails completely, carbon dioxide accumulates to dangerous concentrations within hours and to lethal levels not long after. If the water reclamation system goes down, dehydration becomes a medical emergency within days. If the power grid fails, every other system fails with it. Because every pump, every fan, every heater, every light, every computer, every piece of medical equipment aboard runs on electricity generated by the ship's reactors. The crew is not riding inside the ship the way a passenger rides inside an airplane. The crew is embedded in the ship, integrated into its systems, dependent on its machinery for every breath, every drink, every calorie, every degree of warmth that stands between them and the killing vacuum outside. The relationship between the people and the machine is not the relationship between a driver and a car. It is closer to the relationship between a body and its vital organs. Remove the organ and the body dies. There is no workaround. There is no alternative. The dependence is total. And that total dependence is the second wall. The first wall is distance. The ship is too far from Earth to return, too far to receive help, too far to be rescued. The second wall is dependence. The ship is the sole source of everything the crew needs to survive. Air, water, food, warmth, light, gravity, medicine, shelter from radiation. Shelter from the vacuum. Everything comes from the ship, and only from the ship. There is no other source, there is no backup planet, there is no supply line, there is nothing else. These two walls together form the architecture of confinement. You cannot leave because outside the hull is vacuum. No air, no pressure, temperatures near absolute zero. And you cannot survive without the machine that surrounds you. Every breath, every sip of water, every meal depends on it. You are free to walk the corridors, free to choose how you spend your hours, but you are not free to leave, not free to step outside, not free to go home, because stopping means dying. The ship is not protecting you from discomfort. It is protecting you from instant death. And that protection is the same thing as the confinement. They are not two separate forces. They are the same force, viewed from two directions. The hole that keeps the vacuum out is the wall that keeps you in. The system that recycles your air is the system you can never walk away from. The machine that sustains your life is the machine you can never leave. This is what separates the interstellar ship from every other human habitat that has ever existed. On Earth, even in the most extreme environments, there is an outside. The Antarctic researcher can open the station door and stand on the ice. The air is murderously cold, but it is air. It is a planet. The submarine crew surfaces and sees the sky. The ISS astronaut looks through the cupola and sees Earth hanging right there, blue and white and achingly close, reachable in a matter of hours aboard a Soyuz capsule. The Interstellar crew has none of that. There is no outside that a human body can survive. There is no planet beneath them. There is no home visible through any window. There is only the ship. And the ship is all there will be for years, for decades, for the rest of most lives lived inside it. That is the transformation that distance performs. It does not happen dramatically, with alarms and klaxons and flashing emergency lights. It happens quietly, invisibly, in the mathematics of light speed delay and the biology of human dependence on air and water and food and warmth. The ship was designed as a vessel, a machine of exploration, a bold step into the unknown, carrying humanity beyond the solar system for the first time in history. But somewhere in the crossing, somewhere between the cheering launch and the distant arrival, the vessel becomes something else. It becomes a world. A small, sealed, artificial world with walls you can touch, and a ceiling you can see, and a population you know by name, every single one of them. A world where every resource is finite, every system is critical, every failure is potentially fatal, and every horizon terminates at a metal wall. And a world you can never leave is a world that holds you whether you want to be held or not. The first interstellar ship would not need a warden. It would not need locked doors or sentencing guidelines or surveillance systems. The vacuum would serve as the wall. The distance would serve as the lock. The absolute dependence on the ship's machinery would serve as the chain. The prison would assemble itself, one light year at a time, as Earth shrank behind and the destination refused to grow any larger ahead. And the people inside would eventually understand what had happened. Perhaps not on launch day, when the excitement and the purpose and the sheer historical magnitude of what they were doing filled every waking thought, but later, quietly, in the long years between the stars, when nothing outside the windows changed, and the corridors stayed the same length, and the air tasted the same as it did last year, and the year before that, and the year before that, they would understand that the ship was not just carrying them somewhere. It was holding them. But how tightly does a ship hold you when every one of its systems is the only barrier between your lungs and the void? What does confinement feel like when the walls keeping you captive are also the walls keeping you alive? To answer that, we need to go inside the machine. We need to examine the systems that must work without interruption, without failure, without any outside help, for decades or centuries, to keep a sealed civilization breathing between the stars. And we need to understand why every one of those systems is not just an engineering challenge. It is another wall of the prison. Everything aboard an interstellar ship runs on power. Not some things, not most things, everything. The pumps that circulate air through the corridors, the fans that pull carbon dioxide across chemical scrubbers, the heaters that keep the temperature above freezing, the coolers that prevent it from climbing beyond what human biology can tolerate, the lights that feed the plants that produce oxygen, the filters that clean the water, the computers that monitor every pressure gauge, every temperature sensor, every chemical concentration in the atmosphere, the medical equipment, the communications array, the navigation instruments, the manufacturing tools, the doors and seals and emergency systems. All of it draws from the same source. All of it depends on the same fundamental requirement: electricity. Continuous, reliable, uninterrupted electricity generated inside the ship by a power system that can never be shut down, can never be refueled from outside, and can never be replaced. On Earth, if a power plant fails, the grid reroutes. Other plants pick up the load. Repair crews drive to the facility with spare parts shipped from factories on the other side of the country. The failure is local. The consequences are temporary. Life continues. On an interstellar ship, there is no grid. There is no rerouting. There is no factory across the country. The power system aboard the ship is the only power system that exists in the lives of everyone aboard. If it goes down and stays down, every other system goes with it. The air stops circulating. The scrubbers stop pulling carbon dioxide. The water recyclers stop cycling. The temperature begins drifting toward whatever equilibrium the hull reaches with the interstellar medium, which is approximately 2.7 degrees above absolute zero. The lights go dark, the computers shut off, the ship becomes a freezing, suffocating metal tomb, drifting silently between the stars. So, what powers the ship? Nuclear fission is the most credible option available to any mission designed and launched within the foreseeable future. Fission reactors generate enormous amounts of energy from very small quantities of fuel. A well-designed reactor burning enriched uranium or thorium can operate for decades without needing new fuel rods. Modern naval nuclear reactors, the kind that power aircraft carriers and submarines, routinely run for 20 to 25 years between refuelings. Some newer designs are engineered to operate for the entire operational life of the vessel without ever opening the reactor core. The physics is well understood. The engineering is mature. The track record is measured in thousands of reactor years of continuous naval operation. But a naval reactor is designed to run for 25 years aboard a ship that returns to port, where it is serviced by a trained workforce at a dedicated shipyard backed by the full industrial capacity of a nation. An interstellar reactor has to run for 40, 60, 100 years or more with no port, no shipyard, no external workforce, and no supply chain. The people who maintain it in year 50 were not alive when it was built. The people who maintain it in year 80 learned from the people who learned from the people who were trained by the original engineering team. Every generation of that chain is an opportunity for knowledge to thin, for procedures to drift, for understanding to narrow from principle to rote. The ship would almost certainly carry multiple redundant reactor systems. If one fails, others take the load while the crew attempts repairs. But redundancy is not immunity. 2 reactors can fail. 3 can fail. And every reactor aboard occupies mass and volume that cannot be used for anything else. The ship's designers face a brutal optimization problem. More reactors mean more redundancy, but also more mass to accelerate, more shielding to install, more maintenance burden across the decades. Fewer reactors mean less weight, but tighter margins for error, a narrower gap between normal operations and catastrophe. Fusion propulsion remains the dream candidate, but controlled fusion for continuous power generation has eluded every research program for more than 70 years. For tonight, we assume fission. It is what we know how to build, and its limitations are the limitations the crew will live with. Now, the power is flowing. The reactors are running. The electricity is moving through the ship's distribution grid. What does it power first? Air. A human being consumes roughly 550 liters of oxygen per day and exhales roughly 500 liters of carbon dioxide. Do that inside a sealed container, and the oxygen concentration drops while the carbon dioxide climbs. At concentrations above about 4%, carbon dioxide causes headaches, dizziness, and impaired cognition. Above 7 or 8%, it can cause unconsciousness and death. In a closed spacecraft, without active management, a crew of 100 people would push the atmosphere toward dangerous carbon dioxide levels within hours and toward lethal levels not long after. On the International Space Station, atmosphere management is handled by a combination of systems. Electrolysis units split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen, replenishing the breathable supply. Chemical scrubbers and the Sabatier reaction system pull carbon dioxide from the cabin air and combine it with hydrogen to produce methane and water. The water goes back into the loop. The methane is vented into space. ESA's advanced closed-loop system, installed on the station, represents the current state of the art in spacecraft carbon dioxide recycling, achieving somewhere between 70 and 80% closure of the oxygen loop. That means 70 to 80% of the oxygen that the crew exhales as carbon dioxide gets recovered and returned to the breathable atmosphere. The rest is lost and must be made up from stored reserves or resupply. 70 to 80% closure is remarkable engineering. It is also nowhere near sufficient for a mission that cannot be resupplied. On a journey measured in decades or centuries, every percentage point of loss compounds. What is a minor consumable cost on a 6-month station rotation becomes an existential deficit across a 50-year voyage. The ship needs something closer to complete closure. 98, 99, ideally 100% of the oxygen loop recovered and recycled indefinitely. The most credible path to that kind of closure is biological. Plants, algae, photosynthetic organisms that take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen using light energy. This is, after all, what Earth's atmosphere management system runs on. The oxygen we breathe was produced by photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide we exhale is consumed by plants and phytoplankton. The system works. It has worked for billions of years. It is, in a very real sense, the most thoroughly tested life support technology in existence. The problem is that we have never successfully replicated it in a sealed container at any meaningful scale. Biosphere 2, built in the Arizona desert and sealed in 1991, was the most ambitious attempt. 8 people lived inside a closed ecological system covering approximately 3.14 acres, growing their own food, recycling their air and water through biological processes, attempting to demonstrate that a human community could sustain itself inside a sealed environment. It was, in concept, exactly the kind of system an interstellar ship would need. It ran into trouble almost immediately. Oxygen levels began dropping, not because the plants were failing to produce oxygen, but because soil microorganisms were consuming more oxygen than anyone had predicted. Bacteria in the composting organic matter were metabolizing at rates the models had not accounted for, pulling oxygen out of the atmosphere faster than the plants could replace it. By the end of the first year, oxygen concentration had dropped from the normal 20.9% to roughly 14%, equivalent to the atmospheric pressure at an altitude of approximately 17,000 feet. The crew experienced chronic fatigue, impaired cognition, and difficulty performing physical tasks. Supplemental oxygen had to be pumped in from outside to keep the crew safe. Carbon dioxide levels swung unpredictably. Crop yields fluctuated. Some species thrived in ways that crowded out others. Some collapsed entirely. The ecosystem inside the sealed structure did not behave the way the computer models had predicted, because no model of a complex biological system captures all the feedback loops, all the interdependencies, all the non-linear dynamics that emerge when you actually seal the door and watch what happens. Biosphere 2 was not a failure in the sense that it produced no useful results. It produced enormously valuable results. It revealed exactly how difficult closed-loop biological life support actually is. It demonstrated that sealed ecosystems are far more sensitive, far more unpredictable, and far more demanding of active management than theoretical models suggest. It taught us that you cannot simply install plants and algae and expect a self-balancing atmosphere. You need deep, practiced, continuously maintained understanding of the living systems you depend on. An interstellar ship would need biological life support orders of magnitude more robust than Biosphere 2. Not just plants and algae, but entire functioning microbial ecosystems. Soil bacteria that process nutrients and decompose waste, fungi that break down organic material, potentially insects for pollination and decomposition, multiple redundant biological pathways so that if one crop fails or one microbial population crashes, others can compensate without the whole atmosphere spiraling into crisis. And the people responsible for maintaining those systems, the crew members who monitor oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, who diagnose problems in the plant growth chambers, who understand why a particular algae culture is underperforming and what to do about it. Those people need to be as skilled in year 40 as they were in year 1, and their successors in year 80 need to be equally skilled, and the generation after that. This is the air supply. This is what stands between the crew and suffocation. And it is not a mechanical system you can test and certify and leave running. It is a living system. It changes. It drifts. It responds to variables that are sometimes invisible until they produce a crisis. And it has to work perfectly, day after day, year after year, decade after decade, with no biologist on Earth available to consult. Water is slightly more tractable, but no less essential. Humans need water more urgently than they need food. Severe dehydration becomes a medical emergency within days. On a sealed ship, every drop of water the mission starts with is every drop it will ever have. There are no rivers, there are no aquifers, there is no rain. The ship's water exists in a fixed quantity that must cycle through human bodies, through plants, through recycling and filtration systems, and back again indefinitely. The International Space Station has demonstrated that high-efficiency water recycling is possible. The station's environmental control systems now recover approximately 98% of all water aboard, including moisture from exhaled breath, sweat, and urine. The brine processor assembly, added in 2021, extracts remaining water from the concentrated brine left after urine distillation. The resulting water is cleaner than most municipal tap water on Earth. As of 2023, NASA confirmed that the station had achieved its long-standing goal of 98% overall water recovery. 98% sounds nearly perfect. And for the ISS, which receives regular resupply missions from Earth, it is. But for an interstellar ship operating for decades without any external supply, that remaining 2% matters enormously. 2% loss per cycle, compounded over years, is not a rounding error. It is a slow drain on a finite resource. If the ship starts with 100,000 litres of water and loses 2% per cycle, the loss accumulates. After 50 full cycles, the supply has dropped measurably. After hundreds of cycles over years and decades, the deficit becomes significant unless compensated by other sources. Where does the lost water go? Locked into biological waste, trapped in filtration membranes, escaped as vapor into parts of the ship where recovery systems cannot reach it. Every loss is small, every loss is permanent, and over the time scales of an interstellar voyage, small permanent losses become large permanent deficits. The ship would need reserves large enough to buffer these losses, recovery rates exceeding what even the ISS has achieved, and people who understand the water chemistry well enough to diagnose problems the original engineers never anticipated. Food is the most intimate survival requirement, and the most difficult to sustain in a sealed system. Every calorie consumed by every person aboard has to come from something grown, cultivated, or synthesized within the hull. No deliveries, no imports, no hunting or foraging from an outside environment. The ship is the farm, and the farm has to feed everyone forever. Hydroponic and aeroponic systems, where plants grow in nutrient-rich water or mist rather than soil, are the most space-efficient approach. LED grow lights tuned to the specific wavelengths plants use for photosynthesis can make indoor farming energy efficient enough for a power-constrained environment. High-yield crops like wheat, rice, soybeans, potatoes, and leafy greens provide the most nutrition per square meter of growing area. The ISS has successfully grown lettuce and radishes using these techniques, demonstrating that food production in a controlled environment is feasible. But feeding a crew of 6 with a small experimental garden is a fundamentally different problem from feeding a population of hundreds or thousands across decades. The scale changes everything. You need enormous growing areas, you need redundant crop chambers, so that a failure in one does not cascade into famine. You need genetic diversity in your seed stocks, so that a disease affecting one cultivar does not wipe out your entire harvest. You need soil-based agriculture alongside hydroponics, because real soil with its community of microorganisms provides a resilience and nutrient cycling complexity that water-based systems struggle to match across all crop types. And you need protein. Plants provide carbohydrates, fiber, many vitamins, and some protein. But complete nutrition for a large population across decades requires more concentrated protein sources. Livestock in any traditional sense is extraordinarily expensive in terms of space, water, feed, and waste management. A cow requires roughly 10 times the resources per unit of edible protein that a plant-based system requires. But smaller animals shift the calculation. Chickens and rabbits are far more efficient than cattle. Fish in enclosed aquaculture systems can convert algae and plant waste into protein with relatively modest resource demands. And insects, particularly mealworms and crickets, can convert organic waste into edible protein with remarkable efficiency, requiring minimal space and breeding rapidly. The food system aboard an interstellar ship would not be a single crop or a single method. It would be a web of interlocking production systems, each backing up and feeding into the others. Grain from the hydroponic bays, vegetables from the soil gardens, fish from the aquaculture tanks, insect protein from the bioconversion units. Each system connected to the others through nutrient cycling and waste processing. Each system representing a single point of failure that, if it collapsed without compensation from the others, could threaten the nutritional survival of the entire population. And here is the critical thing. These are not static systems you build once and leave alone. They are living systems. Crops fail, diseases strike plant populations, algae cultures crash, fish populations fluctuate. Insect colonies can collapse if environmental conditions shift. Every growing season, every harvest cycle, every feeding schedule is an act of ongoing management by people who understand agriculture not as a set of instructions in a manual, but as a living practice requiring judgment, experience, and the ability to respond to situations the manual never anticipated. All of this, the power, the air, the water, the food, operates inside a hall that is under constant assault from the environment outside. Radiation in deep interstellar space is a persistent, penetrating, and largely unshieldable threat. On Earth, we live beneath a double layer of protection. The planet's magnetic field deflects most charged particles streaming through the solar system, and the atmosphere absorbs the majority of what gets through. Astronauts on the ISS receive some protection from Earth's magnetosphere, though they still accumulate radiation doses significantly higher than those experienced on the ground. An interstellar ship in the void between stars has neither a planetary magnetic field nor an atmosphere. Galactic cosmic rays, high-energy particles accelerated by supernova remnants and other violent astrophysical processes, stream through interstellar space from every direction. These are not gentle particles. Some galactic cosmic rays carry so much energy that they can punch through meters of solid shielding. They pass through the hull. They pass through the people inside. They deposit ionizing energy in living tissue, damaging DNA, increasing cancer risk, and potentially impairing the central nervous system in ways that compound over years and decades of continuous exposure. NASA research on galactic cosmic ray effects, conducted using simulated cosmic ray beams at ground-based laboratories, has documented measurable impacts on cognition, mood, and neurological function in animal models. The central nervous system is of particular concern because the cognitive demands on a crew operating a complex spacecraft in deep space are extreme. Any degradation of judgment, memory, or decision-making capacity has implications not just for the affected individual, but for the survival of the entire mission. The most effective practical shielding against cosmic radiation is mass. Dense material between the occupants and the outside. Water is an excellent radiation absorber for certain particle types. Storing the ship's water supply in tanks surrounding the habitation areas serves a double purpose: life support resource and radiation shield in one. Lead and polyethylene are also effective for certain components of the radiation spectrum, but no practical amount of shielding completely stops the highest energy galactic cosmic rays. Some particles are so energetic that they will penetrate any reasonable hull thickness. The crew will receive more radiation over their lifetimes than any population on Earth. The question is how much more, and whether that excess can be managed to a level that allows a healthy population across decades. And every kilogram of shielding is a kilogram that must be accelerated to interstellar velocity and eventually decelerated at the destination. Shielding adds mass. Mass requires energy. Energy requires fuel or larger power systems. Larger systems require more structure. More structure requires more shielding. The design spiral is vicious and there is no clean solution. The crew will live with elevated radiation exposure as a permanent, irreducible cost of being between the stars. Beyond radiation, the hull itself faces constant physical erosion. Interstellar space is not perfectly empty. It contains dust grains, particles of rock and ice, atoms of hydrogen drifting between the stars. At the velocities an interstellar ship must travel, even tiny particles carry significant kinetic energy. A grain of sand striking the hull at 5% of light speed delivers an impact far beyond what its mass would suggest at ordinary velocities. Over years and decades of travel, the outer hull accumulates damage from these micro impacts. Shielding layers erode, surface coatings degrade. Microstructural fatigue develops in materials that were designed to last, but were never tested across the timescales involved. The ship would incorporate layered hull designs based on principles similar to the Whipple shield concept developed in the 1940s, where thin outer bumper sheets cause incoming particles to fragment and disperse before they reach the structural hull. But those outer layers take the punishment. They wear, they thin, they need inspection and eventually repair or replacement by people whose relationship to the original hull design is purely historical. And this brings us to the problem that connects every system aboard the ship, and may be more dangerous than any single failure. Spare parts, manufacturing, the physical infrastructure of maintenance across time. Every component on the ship has a finite service life. Pumps wear out, seals degrade, filters clog, circuit boards corrode, reactor containment components fatigue under years of thermal cycling and radiation bombardment. Every part will eventually need repair or replacement. For the first decade, the ship carries spares. For the second decade, those spares begin to run low, and the ship's onboard manufacturing capability becomes critical. Machine shops, polymer processing units, electronics fabrication tools. These systems extend the ship's life by producing new parts when the stored spares are gone. But the manufacturing equipment itself wears out. The machine tools lose precision. The polymer processing units degrade. The raw materials are consumed, and the people operating the equipment need to understand not just the procedures, but the principles. Not just how to follow the steps in the fabrication manual, but why those steps produce the result they do. Because the day will come when the manual does not cover the specific situation, when the available raw material is slightly different from the specified material, when the tool has drifted out of tolerance in a way the calibration procedure does not address. And someone will need to reason from first principles, to improvise, to solve a problem that was never anticipated by the engineers who wrote the manual decades or generations ago. Medical capability follows the same pattern of finite resources and compounding dependency. The ship launches with doctors, surgeons, pharmaceutical supplies, diagnostic equipment, and surgical tools. But pharmaceutical supplies have shelf lives. Many medications degrade over years, losing potency or developing harmful breakdown products. Surgical instruments wear and require maintenance. Diagnostic equipment needs calibration, and the calibration standards themselves need to be maintained. More importantly, the medical knowledge aboard the ship has to cover the full range of conditions that a population of hundreds or thousands of people will experience across decades. On Earth, a rare cancer is treated at a major medical center by an oncologist who has spent a career specializing in that specific disease. A complex cardiac condition is managed by a cardiologist with access to a hospital's full infrastructure. An interstellar ship cannot maintain that depth of specialization. Its population is too small. The training time required to produce a specialist in every medical field is too long to maintain redundant coverage. The ship's medical team will be broadly capable, but it will have gaps, and those gaps will encounter patients who need exactly what is missing. Pharmaceutical production capability, the ability to synthesize medications from basic chemical feedstocks, is a partial solution. Biotechnology, particularly the capacity to produce biological medicines like antibiotics and vaccines, adds another layer. But both require expertise, raw materials, and functioning equipment across decades, maintained by people who trained aboard the ship rather than in a university on Earth. Stand back now and look at the whole picture. Every breath depends on the biological life support system. Every drink of water depends on the recycling and filtration infrastructure. Every meal depends on the agricultural modules and protein cultivation systems. Every degree of warmth depends on the power grid, which depends on the reactors, which depend on the fuel supply and the maintenance crew. Every component of every system eventually needs repair or replacement, which depends on the manufacturing capability, which depends on raw materials and tools, and knowledge that must be maintained across generations. Every illness or injury depends on medical resources that degrade, deplete, and narrow over time. None of these dependencies can be resolved by calling someone on Earth. None can be addressed by ordering a replacement from a supplier. None can be bypassed by stepping outside and finding an alternative. The ship is a closed system in the most absolute sense. What it has is what it has. What breaks must be fixed from within. What runs out is gone. And this web of total dependency is not a flaw in the design. It is the design. It is the inevitable consequence of sealing human beings inside a machine and sending them so far from Earth that the machine becomes the only source of everything they need to stay alive. The ship was not built to confine anyone, it was built to sustain them. But sustaining them and confining them turn out to be the same act, performed by the same systems for the same reason. The reactor that keeps the lights on is also the reactor you cannot walk away from. The air recycler that lets you breathe is also the air recycler you are chained to. The water filter that keeps you hydrated is also the water filter you must service whether you want to or not. Because if you do not, everyone including you begins to die. The food system that feeds you is also the food system that demands your labor, your expertise, your vigilance, every single day, for the rest of your life, because it will not run itself and there is no one else to run it. Every system aboard the ship is simultaneously a lifeline and a shackle. Every piece of machinery is both the thing that saves you and the thing that binds you. The prison does not need bars. It needs pumps and filters and reactors and growing lights and water recyclers and hull plating and spare part inventories and manufacturing tools and medical bays and seed stocks and oxygen sensors. It needs the 10,000 things that keep a civilization alive when there is no planet beneath it and no star close enough to call home. And the people inside that web of machinery, the crew who operate it and maintain it and depend on it and can never leave it, they are not prisoners in the way we normally use that word. Nobody sentenced them. Nobody locked the door against their will. Many of them volunteered. Some of them fought for a place aboard. They believed in the mission. They wanted to go. But wanting to go and being able to leave are not the same thing. And once the ship is far enough from Earth, once the no rescue threshold has been crossed, and the communication delay has stretched past any operationally useful interval, wanting to leave becomes irrelevant. You cannot leave. It does not matter how you feel about it. It does not matter whether you regret your decision or reaffirm it every morning. The ship is where you are. The ship is where you will stay. The ship is where you will grow old and eventually die. surrounded by the same metal walls, breathing the same recycled air, drinking the same recycled water, eating the same crops, grown under the same lights, powered by the same reactors, maintained by the same dwindling pool of knowledge and parts and materials. The machinery is the prison wall, not because it confines deliberately, not because anyone designed it to hold you, but because without it, the only alternative is vacuum. And vacuum is not an alternative anyone survives. But machinery can be understood. Machinery can be repaired. Machinery can be designed and redesigned and optimized by engineers who know what they are doing. The reactor does not care whether the crew is happy. The air recycler does not need the crew to believe in the mission. The water filter functions the same whether the population is thriving socially or tearing itself apart. The harder question, the one that no amount of engineering can answer, is what happens to the people. Not their lungs or their bones or their blood chemistry. Those are biological problems with biological solutions. The harder question is what happens to their minds. What happens to the social fabric of a community sealed inside a machine for decades with no exit, no relief, no outside, and no one coming to help? Because the machinery can be perfect, and the mission can still fail. The reactors can run flawlessly, and the crew can still come apart. The air can stay breathable, and the society can still suffocate. And that is a different kind of wall entirely. The reactors can be perfect. The air recyclers can hum along at full efficiency for decades without a single interruption. The water filtration system can hit its recovery targets year after year. The crops can grow on schedule, the protein systems can produce, the hull can hold against every particle that strikes it. The radiation shielding can perform exactly as designed. Every mechanical and biological system aboard the ship can function within specification for the entire duration of the voyage, and the mission can still fail. Because the most fragile system on the ship is not made of metal or circuitry or biological membranes. It is made of people. And people do not behave like reactors. They do not follow operational curves. They do not perform within specification when the conditions are right and shut down cleanly when the conditions are wrong. They are complicated and contradictory and emotionally volatile and shaped by millions of years of evolution on open savannas and in forests and along coastlines. In environments defined by weather, by seasons, by horizons that stretch to the edge of sight, by the daily experience of a natural world that varied endlessly and was never, ever sealed. The ship offers none of that. The sky is a ceiling. The horizon is a wall. The weather is the same temperature, the same humidity, the same airflow, today, tomorrow, 10 years from now. There is no rain, no wind that was not generated by a fan, no smell of soil after a storm. There is recycled air, faintly metallic, faintly stale, perfectly breathable, and perfectly monotonous. This is not a minor inconvenience. The human sensory system evolved to process a rich, variable, unpredictable natural environment. Our brains are tuned to notice change, new sounds, new smells, shifting light, moving air. When the environment stops changing, when every sensory input becomes predictable and repetitive, something happens to the human mind that psychologists have studied extensively and that no engineering team has ever fully solved. It is called sensory deprivation in its extreme form, and environmental monotony in its milder but more chronic form. And what it does, reliably across every study and every analog environment where it has been observed, is erode cognitive function flatten emotional range, degrade motivation, and slowly, quietly press the human psyche toward a baseline of low-grade distress that does not announce itself with dramatic symptoms but accumulates like silt in a riverbed, gradually changing the shape of everything it touches. The research literature on human confinement in extreme environments is deep and consistent. Antarctic winter over cruise, the small groups of scientists and support personnel who spend the dark months at stations near the South Pole have been studied for decades. Concordia Station, a joint French-Italian research base on the Antarctic Plateau, is one of the most isolated inhabited places on Earth. During winter, the station is completely cut off from the outside world. No flights in or out, no resupply, no evacuation possible for months. The crew of roughly 12 to 15 people is sealed inside the station, with the same faces, the same corridors, the same routine, surrounded by darkness and temperatures that can drop below minus 80 degrees Celsius. The psychological pattern that emerges is remarkably consistent. Researchers call it the winter over syndrome. It includes measurable cognitive slowing, impaired memory and concentration, emotional blunting, irritability, social withdrawal, and a diffuse low-grade depression that settles over the group as the months of isolation and monotony accumulate. Sleep patterns fragment, motivation declines, interpersonal friction increases. Small annoyances that would be trivial in an open environment become sources of genuine conflict when the people involved cannot create distance from each other. And here is what matters most about these findings. The winter over crews know they are going home. They know the dark season will end. They know the supply plane will eventually arrive. They know their isolation has a hard stop. The psychological effects they experience occur despite the certain knowledge that the confinement is temporary. An interstellar ship removes that certainty entirely. There is no supply plane. There is no end-of-season rotation. There is no going home. The people aboard know, with the same clarity they know their own names, that the ship is their entire world. Not temporarily, not for a season, permanently, for the rest of their lives. They will never stand on soil under an open sky. They will never feel weather they did not program. They will never walk beyond the boundaries of the hull. Every corridor they will ever traverse, they have already walked 1,000 times. Every face they will ever see at dinner is a face they saw at dinner last night, and will see again tomorrow night, and every night after that for decades. The Mars 500 experiment, conducted between 2010 and 2011, sealed 6 crew members inside a simulator spacecraft for 520 days to study the psychological and physiological effects of a Mars duration mission. The habitat was confined, communication with the outside was artificially delayed, and the crew had to manage their own schedules, resolve their own conflicts, and maintain their own morale without direct intervention from mission control. The results were instructive but sobering. Several crew members showed significant sleep disruption. One crew member became markedly sedentary and withdrew socially. Interpersonal dynamics shifted over time in ways that were not always visible on the surface, but were measurable in the data. Stress hormones fluctuated. Mood states deteriorated in patterns that correlated with the duration of confinement rather than with any specific event. 500 to 20 days, roughly a year and a half, and the crew knew it was a simulation. They knew the door could open if a genuine emergency occurred. They knew Earth was right outside. The psychological effects they experienced emerged despite all of those safety nets. NASA's CHAPIA program is also gathering data on exactly these psychological effects. Beyond the communication delay research, the crew is growing crops, performing simulated spacewalks, and managing deliberate equipment failures inside that sealed habitat for over a year. The first mission concluded in 2024. The second, which began in October of 2025, has already passed its 300th day. And this is a simulation where the crew knows Earth is right outside the walls. Even in these carefully designed, voluntarily entered, known to be temporary simulations, the data consistently shows the same pattern. Cognitive performance changes, emotional states shift, interpersonal dynamics evolve under pressure. The longer the confinement, the more pronounced the effects. And none of these simulations last more than about a year. None of them involve genuine isolation from Earth. None of them remove the psychological safety net of knowing that the outside world is accessible if something truly goes wrong. An interstellar voyage of 40 or 80 or 100 years is not a longer version of these simulations. It is a categorically different experience. The confinement does not end. The monotony does not end. The faces do not change except through aging, birth, and death. The walls do not move, and the knowledge that you cannot leave is not a temporary acceptance, but a permanent feature of your existence, woven into every decision, every relationship, every thought about the future. This is the environment in which the crew must maintain not just individual psychological health, but collective social function. And that collective dimension is where the challenge becomes most severe. Because a sealed ship with no exit is the most unforgiving social environment humans have ever inhabited. On Earth, conflict resolution has a universal backstop: distance. If a relationship becomes intolerable, you can leave, you can move to another city, you can change jobs, you can stop seeing the person you argued with, you can create physical and social space between yourself and the source of your distress. This ability to withdraw, to separate, to simply go somewhere else is so fundamental to how human societies manage conflict that we barely notice it until it is gone. On an interstellar ship, it is gone. Completely. Permanently. The person you had a bitter argument with yesterday is sitting at the next table at breakfast this morning. And every meal after that for the rest of your life. You cannot avoid them. You cannot resign. There is no town. There is no across. There is the ship, and inside it there is everyone, and outside it there is death. This means that every interpersonal conflict aboard the ship exists inside a pressure vessel with no relief valve. Grievances cannot dissipate naturally the way they do in open societies, where time and distance and the simple turnover of daily life gradually dilute the emotional charge of a disagreement. Aboard the ship, grievances accumulate. They layer on top of each other. The insult from 3 years ago is still sitting in the same room as you. The betrayal from 5 years ago still eats at the same table. The unresolved dispute from a decade ago is now encrusted with years of subsequent friction. None of it ever truly resolved because resolution in human terms usually involves some element of separation. And separation is the one thing the ship cannot provide. The governance structures aboard the ship must account for this, not as an afterthought, not as a secondary concern behind reactor maintenance and crop rotation schedules. Governance may be the single most important system on the ship. More important than any piece of hardware, because hardware failures can be repaired by competent people working together. But if the people stop working together, if the social fabric tears, no reactor design in the world can save the mission. The founding generation, the crew that boards the ship on launch day, agrees to the mission. They have been selected, screened, trained. They understand what they are committing to. They accept the command structure or the governance charter or whatever framework the mission planners have established. They believe in it, or at least they accept it as the price of being part of something extraordinary. But their children did not agree. Their children were born into the ship, into the mission, into the governance structure. They inherited obligations they never chose. They live under rules written by people who may have been dead for decades by the time those rules chafe. And when those children grow up and have children of their own, the distance between the living population and the founding generation's authority stretches further. By the third or fourth generation, the founding charter is ancient history. The mission statement is something written by ancestors who lived on a planet no one aboard has ever seen. The rules that govern daily life were designed for a society that no longer exists, by people who could not possibly have anticipated the specific pressures and circumstances of life in year 150 of the voyage. The Mayflower Compact, signed aboard the Mayflower in 1620, was a single page written by a small group of people trying to establish basic governance for a community cutting loose from established authority on a dangerous voyage to an unknown destination. It worked, more or less, for a single Atlantic crossing and the immediate settlement period that followed. An interstellar ship needs something orders of magnitude more sophisticated. Something that can adapt across centuries while still protecting the fundamental requirements of the mission. Something that gives the living generation genuine authority over their own lives without allowing any single generation to abandon the mission entirely. This tension between inherited obligation and living autonomy is not a problem that political philosophy has cleanly solved, even on Earth where the stakes are lower and the options are wider. On a ship where abandoning the mission means the entire population dies in interstellar space, the tension is existential. The living generation must feel that their governance is legitimate, that their voices matter, that they are not simply executing orders issued by long-dead ancestors who could not have understood their reality, but the mission itself, the trajectory, the destination, the fundamental requirement that the ship keep flying and the systems keep running cannot be subject to the kind of wholesale revision that a frustrated population might demand in a moment of collective crisis. Some researchers have proposed layered constitutional structures, a core of inviolable principles protecting the mission's survival requirements and the basic rights of everyone aboard, surrounded by a broader framework of law and governance that the living population can revise through legitimate democratic processes. The challenge is drawing the line between what is inviolable and what is revisable. Draw it too broadly and the founding generation's preferences permanently override the autonomy of every generation that follows. Draw it too narrowly and a future population might vote to do something that destroys the mission. There is no clean answer. But the ship that launches without a deeply considered governance architecture has already planted the seeds of a crisis that could emerge at any point across the voyage. Whenever the living population decides that the obligations they inherited are not ones they are willing to accept. Now consider the children more carefully, because the children are not a side effect of the mission. They are the mechanism by which the mission continues. Without children, a 42-year voyage might be completed by the original crew. but anything longer requires new generations to replace the old. The ship needs children to be born, raised, educated, and trained, so that when the founded generation ages and dies, there are people ready and able to maintain every critical system, manage every essential process, and carry the mission forward. But those children did not volunteer. They were born into a world they did not choose. A world unlike anything human developmental psychology has ever studied at scale. They will grow up without ever experiencing the outdoors. The concept of outside will be abstract to them. Weather is something they learn about in history lessons. Seasons are something the ship's environmental systems simulate, if the designers thought to include that feature. The sky is something on a screen or in a book, not something above their heads. Research on child development in confined environments suggests that children calibrate to whatever they experience as normal. A child raised aboard the ship will not feel the absence of an open sky the way an adult who grew up on Earth would feel it. The ship is simply their world, the way any environment is simply the world to a child who has no basis for comparison. This is both reassuring and troubling. Reassuring because it means the children will likely cope. Troubling because it means they will be genuinely different from the people who launched the mission, shaped by circumstances that no human child has ever experienced before. Their vision development may be affected. Human eyes develop in response to the visual environment during childhood. Children who spend their formative years in environments with limited distance vision, consistently indoor lighting, and restricted visual range show higher rates of myopia. The architectural design of the ship's habitats must account for this, providing spaces with sufficient visual depth to support healthy eye development. This is not catastrophic, but it is one of dozens of similar considerations that multiply across generations if not attended to from the beginning. Their immune systems will be calibrated to whatever microbial environment the ship contains. On Earth, immune development is shaped by exposure to a diverse and constantly shifting microbial world. Soil bacteria, airborne fungi, animal-borne organisms, the vast and varied microbiome of a living planet. A ship is a closed environment with a limited and controlled microbial community. The children born there will have immune systems shaped by that limited ecology. Whether this leads to increased susceptibility to certain conditions, whether it mirrors the patterns seen in the hygiene hypothesis, where reduced early life microbial exposure correlates with higher rates of allergies and autoimmune conditions, is an open question with significant implications for population health across generations. Their psychological development will be shaped by the knowledge that they cannot leave. Adults who boarded the ship chose to be there. They carry the psychological weight of that choice, but also the meaning. They sacrificed something. They made a decision that cost them the world they knew. And they can draw strength from the significance of that decision. The children have none of that. They did not sacrifice anything because they never had anything to sacrifice. The ship is not a choice they made. It is a condition they were born into. And the difference between a confinement you chose and a confinement you inherited is psychologically enormous. One carries meaning, the other carries only walls. Education aboard the ship is not a luxury or a social nicety. It is a survival system as critical as the air recyclers or the water filters. Every piece of knowledge needed to keep the ship alive must be transmitted from one generation to the next, with a fidelity that no educational system on Earth has ever been required to maintain under comparable conditions. The founding crew brought with them the full depth of expertise needed to operate every system aboard. Reactor physics, ecosystem dynamics, agricultural science from soil microbiology to crop genetics, water chemistry, atmospheric management, material science, medical practice from surgery to pharmacology, navigation, computer systems, hull engineering, manufacturing. All of this knowledge must be equally alive in the minds and hands of the second generation, and the third, and the 10th. Not preserved in databases alone, though databases are important. Knowledge stored in a computer is information. Knowledge that lives in a trained human mind, that can be applied flexibly to novel situations, that can improvise when the textbook scenario does not match what is actually happening. That is understanding. And understanding is what keeps the ship alive when something unexpected occurs. On Earth, we maintain complex knowledge across generations through an enormous infrastructure of universities, trade schools, apprenticeship systems, professional cultures, peer review, libraries, and the ability to consult with specialists anywhere in the world. These institutions evolved over centuries specifically because the accurate transmission of complex knowledge is not automatic. It requires deliberate, sustained, institutional investment. It requires a culture that values expertise and funds the structures that produce it. It requires redundancy, so that if one institution fails or one expert retires, others carry the knowledge forward. A ship of a few hundred or a few thousand people must replicate this entire infrastructure internally. It must produce its own teachers, its own mentors, its own training programs across every critical discipline. It must create a culture in which technical competence is understood as a survival imperative, not a career track. It must ensure that every generation understands not just the procedures for maintaining the ship's systems, but the principles behind those procedures, so that when a situation arises that the procedures do not cover, someone can reason their way to a solution. Rather than standing helplessly in front of a panel, they were taught to operate but never taught to understand. The failure mode of knowledge loss is uniquely dangerous because it does not announce itself. A reactor failure triggers alarms. A hull breach is immediately apparent. An atmospheric imbalance shows up on sensors. But the gradual erosion of understanding across generations is silent. It happens in the space between what one generation knows deeply and what the next generation learns adequately. Each transfer is almost complete. But the small losses accumulate. A procedure that was understood at the level of principle in Generation 1 is understood at the level of steps in Generation 3. The difference is invisible until the day something happens that the steps do not cover. And then, someone opens a panel on a system they were taught to operate and realizes, with a dread that no alarm can match, that they do not actually understand what they are looking at. This is not speculation. It is a documented pattern in human institutions. Complex knowledge degrades across transmission unless active measures are taken to preserve it. Languages simplify. Technical skills narrow. Understanding contracts toward the procedural and away from the foundational. On Earth, this degradation is counteracted by the constant influx of new information, new research, new practitioners entering the field with fresh training. On a ship, there is no influx. There is only what was brought aboard and what has been maintained since. And maintenance of knowledge, like maintenance of machinery, requires ongoing effort, ongoing investment, and ongoing vigilance against the slow drift toward mediocrity that all institutions experience over time. The social dynamics of a closed population under these conditions are difficult to predict with confidence, because no human community has ever existed under precisely these circumstances. The closest analogies: Antarctic stations, submarines, isolated island communities, early colonial settlements, all share some features but differ in critical ways. Antarctic crews rotate home. Submarine deployments end. Island communities have land and sky and weather. Colonial settlements, however isolated, stood on planets with air and water and room to expand. The interstellar ship combines total physical confinement, absolute isolation from any external society, permanent duration, complete dependence on internal systems, and a population too small to support the full institutional depth of a planetary civilization. No historical analogue combines all of these features simultaneously. The ship is unprecedented, and the social dynamics it produces will be unprecedented too. What the research consistently suggests is that small communities under prolonged stress can go in two directions. They can tighten, forming intense bonds of mutual dependence and shared identity. People rely on each other, value each other, build the kind of trust that only develops under shared hardship. The community becomes resilient because its members genuinely care about each other and about the collective mission. Or they can fracture. Factions form around real or perceived differences. Grievances harden into enmities. Trust erodes until cooperation becomes transactional rather than genuine. Cliques develop, each convinced that the other is undermining the common good. Leadership is challenged not on the basis of competence, but on the basis of allegiance. The social fabric thins until it tears, and when it tears in a sealed environment, there is nowhere for the torn pieces to go. They remain in the same corridors, eating at the same tables, breathing the same air, their mutual hostility a permanent feature of the social landscape. Which direction any given community goes depends on factors that are only partially within the control of mission designers. Leadership quality matters enormously. The presence of effective conflict resolution mechanisms matters. The culture the community builds around shared purpose and shared identity matters. Whether people feel heard, whether they feel their contributions are valued, whether they feel they have genuine agency within the constraints of the mission, all of this matters. But it cannot be fully designed in advance. Culture is not a blueprint that can be installed and left to run. It is a living, evolving, fragile thing that requires constant cultivation. The mission planners can create initial conditions that favor cohesion. They can establish governance structures that promote fairness. They can design physical spaces that encourage community interaction. They can select crew members for psychological resilience and interpersonal skill. But once the door closes and the ship accelerates beyond the reach of Earth, the culture aboard belongs to the people living it. And what they do with it, how they shape it, whether they strengthen it or allow it to decay, determines whether the mission survives as a functioning society or slowly comes apart from the inside. The ship needs art. It needs music and literature and sport and celebration. Not as luxuries to be tolerated if resources allow, as necessities. The things that make human life feel worth living are not separate from the survival mission. They are part of it. A community that loses its cultural vitality, that becomes purely functional, purely procedural, purely focused on the mechanical task of keeping the systems running, loses something essential long before any physical system fails. It loses the psychological resilience to handle the hard years. It loses the motivation to transmit not just technical skills, but meaning to the next generation. It loses the belief that being aboard this ship, doing this work, raising these children, maintaining these systems, matters for something beyond mere survival. And meaning is the most perishable resource on the ship. More perishable than food, more fragile than water recycling membranes, more difficult to maintain than reactor containment vessels. Because meaning cannot be manufactured. It cannot be synthesized from feedstocks or fabricated in a machine shop. It has to be felt. It has to be believed. It has to be genuine enough that a person born in year 100 of the voyage, a person who has never seen Earth, who has never known any world but the inside of this ship, can look at their life and believe it is worth living. Not just endurable, worth living. The founding generation carries meaning with them from Earth. They remember what they left behind. They chose to leave it. The magnitude of that choice gives weight to everything they do aboard the ship. They are explorers, pioneers, the first humans to cross the interstellar void. Their lives have a narrative arc that connects a planet of origin to a destination among the stars. That narrative sustains them. The second generation inherits that narrative, but at one remove. Their parents tell them about Earth. They see photographs and recordings. They learn the history. But Earth is an abstraction to them, a story, not a memory. The meaning they carry is borrowed, not earned through personal sacrifice. By the third and fourth generation, Earth is ancient history. As remote and possibly as mythologized as the founding of Rome is to a modern Italian. The destination is a promise made by ancestors who lived in a world no one alive can remember. And the mission, the inherited obligation to maintain the ship and continue the voyage, is something that was chosen for them, not by them. Maintaining commitment to a multi-generational goal across this kind of temporal and experiential distance is one of the hardest things any human institution has ever attempted. Religions have done it, more or less, across centuries and millennia. Cultural traditions have survived enormous spans of time, but religions and cultural traditions offer meaning that connects to something felt as larger than any individual life. They give people a reason to carry the tradition that is not just duty, but genuine belief. The ship needs something like that. Not propaganda, not enforced compliance, something that the people aboard can genuinely hold and genuinely transmit to their children as something worth holding. Something that makes the voyage feel meaningful to the person who was born in the middle of it and will die in the middle of it, who will never see the departure or the arrival, whose entire existence unfolds inside the same metal walls that held their parents and will hold their children. Building that meaning is not an engineering problem. It is a human problem. Perhaps the deepest human problem the mission will face. And unlike reactor physics or atmospheric chemistry, it does not have equations. It does not have specifications. It does not have test protocols that confirm whether the system is performing within tolerance. It has only the daily, lived experience of people trying to find purpose in a world they did not choose, inside a machine they cannot leave, on a journey whose end they will never see. And if that meaning fails, if the culture aboard the ship cannot generate and sustain a genuine sense of purpose across the generations, then the mission drifts. Not physically. The ship keeps flying whether the crew believes in it or not. The reactors do not care about morale, but socially, culturally, psychologically, the mission loses its center. People stop maintaining systems with the rigor the systems demand. Knowledge transmission loses its urgency. Governance structures become hollow, enforced by habit rather than legitimacy. The ship continues, but the civilization inside it hollows out, becoming something that functions on the surface, but has lost the animating belief that made the sacrifice worthwhile. This is the slow failure, the one that does not trigger alarms, the one that accumulates across decades, visible only in retrospect as a trajectory bending the wrong way for a long time. And preventing it requires the living generation to take seriously the implications of trends that have not yet become crises, to act on the basis of projections rather than emergencies, to invest in culture and meaning and social infrastructure with the same urgency they invest in reactor maintenance and crop rotation. That kind of institutional foresight is rare in human societies with the full resources of a planet to draw on. Building it into a sealed community of a few hundred or a few thousand people, maintaining it across generations, and doing it all without any external check or correctional support may be the most ambitious social engineering challenge the entire enterprise entails. The ship does not need to malfunction to become a prison. It does not need a reactor failure, or a hull breach, or a crop blight. It does not need a dramatic catastrophe that announces itself with alarms and emergency protocols. It only needs to keep flying, keep sealing its population inside the same hull, breathing the same air, walking the same corridors, seeing the same faces, year after year after year, with no door that opens outward, no world beyond the hull, and no voice from outside to say when it ends. The confinement is not an accident. It is not a design flaw. It is the mission. The mission is confinement. Getting from one star to another requires sealing human beings inside a machine for longer than most civilizations on Earth have lasted, and asking them to maintain not just the machine but themselves, their knowledge, their culture, their sanity, their social bonds, their sense of purpose, across a span of time that would erode any institution ever built on solid ground. And the people inside will feel that weight, not all at once, not on launch day, when the purpose burns bright and the meaning is sharp, and the excitement carries everything forward, but later. In the quiet years, in the middle decades when the departure is too far behind to remember clearly, and the arrival is too far ahead to imagine concretely. In the ordinary days that stretch into ordinary weeks, that stretch into ordinary months, all of them identical, all of them enclosed, all of them lived inside the same machine, they will feel the walls, not the metal walls of the hull, though those are real enough, the walls built by the impossibility of leaving, the walls built by total dependence on systems they can neither abandon nor escape. The walls built by distance so vast that home became a word without a referent, and the future became a promise made by strangers who lived in a world that no longer exists. But there is something deeper still. Something that lies beneath the psychology and the social dynamics, and the governance structures and the educational systems and the cultural challenges. Something that reframes everything we have discussed tonight into a single unifying idea. The ship was built to reach a destination. It was designed as a means to an end, a vehicle that would carry humanity from one star to another. The destination is the point. The arrival is the purpose. The journey is supposed to be the price you pay for the reward of getting there. But for almost everyone who will ever live aboard the ship, the journey is not the price. The journey is the life. The destination is an abstraction. The arrival, if it ever comes, will belong to someone else. What they have, what they hold, what they experience every day from birth to death is the journey itself. The sealed corridors, the recycled air, the artificial light, the same faces, the same walls, the same world, unchanged and unchangeable, for as long as they live. The destination does not define their existence. The ship does. And the ship is not taking them somewhere. The ship is holding them. Let me tell you the version of this story that everyone wants to hear. The ship launches. The crew is brave and competent and united by a shared sense of purpose that burns so brightly it lights the corridors better than any LED array. The reactors run perfectly. The air stays breathable. The crops grow on schedule. The water recyclers hum along at full efficiency. The hull holds. The radiation shielding performs within acceptable limits. The children born aboard grow up healthy and curious and committed to the mission their parents began. The governance structures hold across the generations. The knowledge passes cleanly from the old to the young without critical loss. The culture aboard the ship sustains meaning and purpose, even for the people born in the middle of the voyage who will never see either the departure or the arrival. Generations come and go. Conflicts arise and are resolved by processes the community trusts. Systems fail and are repaired by people who trained well and who train their successors equally well. The agricultural systems produce enough. The medical systems cope. The manufacturing capability keeps the machinery alive. And then, in the lifetime of the 5th or the 7th or the 10th generation, one star in the forward cameras begins to grow brighter than the others, perceptibly brighter, year by year. The long deceleration begins. A planetary system resolves from a point of light into a collection of distinct worlds, and among them there is a planet, rocky, orbiting in the habitable zone, showing spectral signatures that suggest an atmosphere. The crew adjusts course. They enter orbit. They send probes down. They analyze the surface, the chemistry, the temperature gradients, and eventually, after all the data is in, they make the decision. They descend. Human beings set foot on a world orbiting another star for the first time in the history of life on Earth. The mission succeeded. This is the version of the story where everything works. And I want you to hold it in your mind while I tell you what it actually means, because the success is real, but it conceals something that changes the shape of the entire narrative when you look at it closely enough. The mission succeeded. But who succeeded? Not the people who launched it. They died aboard the ship, decades or centuries before arrival. They never saw the destination except as a faint point of light in the forward cameras. Not the people who designed it. They died on Earth, probably before the ship had even crossed a significant fraction of the distance. The people who arrive, the ones who actually set foot on the new world, are not the people who chose the mission. They are the descendants of the people who chose the mission. They were born inside the ship. They grew up inside the ship. They have never known anything except the inside of the ship. Their entire lives, from first breath to the moment they step onto alien soil, were lived inside a sealed metal world that they did not choose and could not leave. The mission succeeded, and the price of that success was paid in lifetimes, not in fuel or funding or engineering hours, in human lifetimes spent entirely inside a machine, lives that began and ended within the same hull, childhoods without sky, adulthoods without horizons, old age without the option of going somewhere new or starting over or simply walking away. And here is the thing that makes this different from every other sacrifice in human history. The soldiers who storm a beach know that if they survive, they go home. The explorers who cross an ocean know that the crossing ends. The colonists who settle a harsh frontier know that they chose the frontier and that their children will inherit a world that grows more livable with each generation. The sacrifice has a shape. It has a beginning and an end. The cost is paid, and then the cost is done. On the interstellar ship, the cost is never done. It is not paid once and then redeemed. It is paid continuously, every day by every person aboard, for the entire duration of the voyage. The confinement does not let up because the systems are working. The isolation does not ease because the mission is on track. The dependence on the machine does not relax because the machine is performing well. In fact, the better the ship works, the longer the confinement lasts. Because a ship that works is a ship that keeps flying, and a ship that keeps flying is a ship that keeps holding its population inside. This is the paradox at the heart of everything we have discussed tonight. The interstellar ship does not become a prison because it fails. It becomes a prison because it works. A ship that fails, that suffers a catastrophic reactor meltdown, or a hull breach that cannot be repaired, or a cascading systems collapse that kills the crew, that ship stops being a prison the moment it stops being a ship. The confinement ends because the vessel ends. Tragically, horribly, but definitively. The people aboard are released, if that is the right word, by the same failure that kills them. A ship that works, that holds together, that keeps its population alive decade after decade in the void between the stars. That ship becomes more confining with every passing year. Because every year that passes is another year farther from Earth. Another year deeper into a journey that cannot be reversed. Another year in which the hull has been the sky, and the recycled air has been the atmosphere, and the same corridors have been the only roads, and the same faces have been the only neighbors. The success of the ship is the persistence of the confinement. They are the same thing measured on the same axis. Think about what the word prison actually means. Stripped of its criminal connotations. A prison is a place you cannot leave. A place where your movements are bounded by walls you did not build and cannot remove. A place where your survival depends on systems controlled by forces larger than yourself. A place where the daily rhythms of your life are determined by the structure you inhabit, rather than by your own free choices. A place where the outside world is visible, perhaps, through a window or a screen, but is unreachable in any practical sense. A place where time passes, but your relationship to the world outside the walls does not change, because the walls do not move and neither can you. By this definition, the interstellar ship is a prison from the moment it crosses the no-rescue threshold. Not a metaphorical prison, not a poetic exaggeration, a literal prison, defined by the same structural features that define every prison ever built. Walls you cannot pass through, an outside you cannot reach, dependence on internal systems for survival, no practical possibility of departure, a bounded world within a larger world you can see but cannot touch. The difference is that this prison was not built to punish. It was built to explore. It was built with the best intentions, the highest aspirations, the most extraordinary courage that a civilization could muster. And it became a prison anyway, because the physics of interstellar distance does not care about intentions. The vacuum outside the hull does not care about aspirations. The light years between the ship and Earth do not care about courage. They simply exist, immense and impassable, and they transform the ship from a vehicle of liberation into a container of confinement by the simple, patient, irresistible mechanism of being too vast to cross quickly. And the people aboard know this. They may not articulate it the way I am articulating it now. They may never use the word prison to describe their home, because home is what the ship is to them, the only home they have. But they feel it. They feel it in the impossibility of leaving. They feel it in the absolute dependence on systems they cannot abandon. They feel it in the knowledge that the corridors they walk today are the corridors they will walk tomorrow and every day after that until the day they die. They feel it in the slow, crushing weight of a future that is not open-ended, not full of possibility, not branching into 1,000 potential paths the way a life on a planet branches. Their future is singular. It is the ship. It has always been the ship. It will always be the ship. And the destination, the star they are flying toward, the planet they hope to reach, what does the destination mean to them? For the founding generation, it meant everything. It was the reason for the sacrifice, the light at the end of a very long tunnel. But for the generations born in the middle, the destination is an abstraction, a promise made by people who lived in a world none of them have ever seen. A reward that will arrive, if it arrives at all, for people who have not yet been born. The destination does not sustain them. The destination does not comfort them on the hard days. The destination is a point of light in the forward cameras that grows imperceptibly brighter over decades, so slowly that no single person ever perceives the change from one day to the next. What sustains them, if they are sustained, is something else entirely. Something internal. Something built from the culture and the relationships and the daily work and the small human moments that make a life feel like a life, rather than a sentence. The act of raising a child and watching that child grow into someone competent and curious. The act of repairing a system and knowing that the repair will keep people breathing for another year. The act of making something beautiful, a piece of music, a story, a meal prepared with care, in an environment that offers so little beauty that every handmade scrap of it becomes precious. These things are real. They matter. They are not diminished by the fact that they happen inside a prison. People in prisons on Earth have always found ways to create meaning, to build relationships, to sustain inner lives of dignity and purpose despite the walls around them. The human capacity for meaning making is not destroyed by confinement. It is tested by it, and sometimes it emerges stronger, distilled by the pressure into something more concentrated and more deliberately held than anything that forms in the spacious, comfortable, easily distracted environment of an open world. But the meaning that forms inside the ship forms under a particular kind of pressure, and that pressure has consequences. Every relationship aboard exists inside the knowledge that there is no alternative. You do not choose your community from a world of possibilities. You are born into a fixed population and you remain in that population for life. Every friendship, every romance, every rivalry, every alliance, every enmity exists within a closed system where the same people occupy the same space indefinitely. The bonds that form under these conditions may be extraordinarily deep. They may also be extraordinarily brittle, because they exist without the resilience that comes from knowing you could walk away. Freedom is not just the ability to go somewhere. It is the ability to leave where you are. It is the knowledge that if this place becomes intolerable, if this relationship becomes destructive, if this community becomes hostile, you have options. You can go, you can start over, you can find a different place that fits you better. This knowledge, this background awareness of options is so fundamental to the psychology of life in an open society that we rarely think about it consciously. It is the water we swim in, the gravity we walk through, the invisible infrastructure of autonomy that makes freedom feel like freedom rather than just another word. On the ship, that infrastructure does not exist. There are no options. There is no somewhere else. The place you are in is the place you will always be in. The people you are with are the people you will always be with. And the knowledge that you cannot leave colors everything. It colors how you handle conflict. Because you know you will face this person again tomorrow and every day after. It colors how you make decisions. Because every decision is permanent in a way that decisions on Earth rarely are. It colors how you think about the future, because the future holds only more of what the present holds. The same ship, the same walls, the same recycled air, the same world, repeated, day after day, until the day you die. This is not a dramatic deprivation. It is not the screaming, pounding, obvious suffering of acute crisis. It is the quiet, slow, daily accumulation of a life lived without the possibility of departure. It is the psychological equivalent of the 2% water loss that compounds across decades, small enough to ignore on any given day, large enough to shape an entire life. And now I want to reframe everything we have covered tonight into a single image, because I think it captures the truth of the interstellar ship more honesty than any technical discussion of reactors and recyclers and radiation shields. The first interstellar ship would be humanity's first artificial world. Not a habitat module attached to a space station in low orbit. Not a sealed research base on the surface of Mars. A world. A complete self-sustaining, self-contained civilization floating in the void between stars, carrying within its hull everything that a human community needs to survive. Air, water, food, power, medicine, shelter, governance, culture, education, law, art, love, conflict, birth, death, all of it enclosed within a single structure, all of it dependent on a single set of systems, all of it sealed off from everything outside. On Earth, a world is a planet. It has oceans and mountains and forests and deserts and weather and seasons and a sky that stretches from horizon to horizon. It has space, room to move, room to grow, room to make mistakes and recover from them, room to be alone when you need to be alone and to find others when you need company. It has an outside that is vast and varied and always accessible. The ship's world has none of that. It has corridors and compartments and agricultural modules and reactor bays and medical facilities and common areas designed by engineers who tried their best to create spaces that feel livable. But it does not have space in the way that a planet has space. It does not have room in the way that a continent has room. It does not have an outside that anyone can reach and survive. Its world is bounded, measured, finite, and enclosed. Every resource inside it is accounted for. Every cubic meter of volume is allocated. Every calorie of energy is budgeted. Nothing is wasted because nothing can be replaced. This is what a world looks like when it is built by engineers instead of geology, when it is sustained by machinery instead of ecosystems, when it is bounded by a hole instead of a horizon. It works, it functions, it keeps people alive, but it does not feel like freedom, because freedom requires the possibility of leaving, and leaving requires somewhere to go. And between the stars, there's nowhere to go except deeper into the void, or back toward an Earth that is years or decades or centuries behind you and receding with every passing second. The ship is the world, and the world is the prison. Not because anyone designed it as a prison, not because anyone intended to confine the people inside, but because a world you cannot leave, however lovingly constructed, however brilliantly engineered, however nobly conceived, is a world that holds you whether you wish to be held or not. And this is what makes the first interstellar mission fundamentally different from every other act of exploration in human history. When the first humans walked out of Africa, they walked into new territory, but they could always walk back. When the Polynesians sailed across the Pacific, they sailed toward new islands, but the ocean was a medium they could traverse in either direction. When the European explorers crossed the Atlantic, the crossing was dangerous but reversible. The new world was vast and open, and offered freedoms that the old world did not. The interstellar ship offers no such openness. It does not deliver its passengers to a vast new territory where they can spread out and breathe and build. It delivers them, if it delivers them at all, after decades or centuries of confinement in a sealed container. The freedom it promises is on the far side of a journey that is itself the opposite of freedom. You must endure the prison to reach the destination. And the prison lasts so long that for most of the people who will ever live inside it, the destination is not real. It is not something they will experience. It is a word, a concept, a hope that belongs to someone else. Someone unborn. Someone who will live in a future that the current generation can imagine, but will never inhabit. The destination is real for the last generation. The ones who actually arrive. The ones who see the new star growing in the forward cameras. Who orbit the new planet, who descend to the surface and breathe new air and stand under a new sky. For them, the prison opens. The confinement ends. The walls fall away and the world expands from the dimensions of a whole to the dimensions of a planet. But by the time they arrive, they are people shaped by the prison, shaped by the confinement, shaped by the sealed corridors and the recycled air, and the artificial light and the limited population, and the absolute dependence on machinery and the impossibility of departure. They are not the people who left Earth. They are not the people Earth intended to send. They are the people the ship made, formed by its constraints, calibrated to its rhythms, adapted to its limitations. They may find the openness of a planetary surface disorienting rather than liberating. They may find the unpredictability of weather and wildlife and natural ecosystems threatening rather than exhilarating. They may look at the open sky and feel not freedom but agoraphobia, the terrifying absence of walls they have known their entire lives. This is the deepest irony of the interstellar mission. The ship was designed to free humanity from the confines of a single solar system, to carry the species beyond its cradle and into the wider galaxy, to make us an interstellar civilization, unbounded by the limitations of one world orbiting one star. And the mechanism of that liberation is a machine that confines its inhabitants more totally, more completely, more permanently than any structure ever built on Earth. The first interstellar ship would not fail because its engines gave out, or its hull cracked, or its reactors went cold. If it fails, it will fail because a sealed community of human beings living inside a machine they cannot leave, dependent on systems they cannot abandon, governed by rules they did not write, educated by institutions they must rebuild from scratch in every generation, separated from Earth by a silence that grows deeper with every passing year, could not sustain the coherence and the competence and the will needed to keep the mission alive across the decades or the centuries it demands. And if it succeeds, it will succeed at a cost that no mission plan can fully account for. The cost of lives lived entirely inside a machine. The cost of childhoods without sky. The cost of communities without exit. The cost of freedom traded for survival. Autonomy traded for dependence. The open world traded for a sealed one, all in the service of a destination that most of the people who pay the cost will never live to see. This is not an argument against going. Humanity may need to become interstellar to survive. The threats that face a single planet civilization, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, the eventual death of our sun, the possibility of self-inflicted catastrophe, these threats are real, and the only long-term answer to all of them is to spread beyond one world. The first interstellar ship may not just be an act of exploration, it may be an act of survival for the species. And acts of survival require sacrifice. They always have. But we should be honest about what the sacrifice actually is. It is not just fuel and funding and years of engineering work. It is human lives lived inside a container. It is freedom exchanged for confinement. It is the open world traded for a sealed one. And the people who make that trade, the ones who board the ship, knowing what it will become, they deserve to be understood clearly, not romanticized, not mythologized, not reduced to heroes in a simple story about the triumph of the human spirit. They are people who will live inside a machine, who will breathe recycled air and drink recycled water, and eat crops grown under artificial light, and depend on reactors they can never shut down, and walk corridors they have memorized, and see the same faces every day until the day they die. They are people who chose this, or who were born into it, and who carry the weight of it every single day, quietly, without fanfare, without rescue, without the knowledge that it will ever end in their lifetimes. They are not just explorers. They are inmates of the most extraordinary prison ever conceived. A prison built not from cruelty, but from distance. A prison whose walls are vacuum and whose lock is the speed of light. A prison that functions because it keeps its inhabitants alive, and that confines because it must keep its inhabitants alive, and that cannot be escaped because escaping it means dying in the void between the stars. The first interstellar ship would be the bravest thing humanity ever built, and the loneliest, and the most confining. It would carry our highest aspirations and our deepest vulnerabilities sealed together inside a hull, hurtling through the dark at a fraction of the speed of light, toward a destination that might be decades or centuries away. And for the people inside, the journey would not feel like flying. It would feel like being held. The stars are 25 trillion miles away, the nearest one, the closest point of light beyond our own sun, and the hardest truth about reaching it is not the distance. It is not the engineering. It is not the propulsion or the shielding or the recyclers or the reactors. The hardest truth is that the first ship to leave for another star would become a world. A small, sealed, finite, inescapable world. And the people inside it would live their lives inside that world, dependent on it, confined by it, sustained by it, imprisoned by it, for as long as the voyage lasted. The first road to the stars would not feel like freedom. It would feel like being locked inside the only world that can keep you alive, and the door would not open until long after you were gone.